everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today I've got a gun on the table that we've had a lot of requests for. It's a Beretta APX. This particular one is chambered in 9mm, and a friend of mine loaned the gun to us so that we can do a review on it. So let me pick the gun up, show you that it's unloaded, and talk about it a little bit. So of course we do have an unloaded Beretta APX. Comes with 3 factory 17-round magazines. They're steel, and we did find that they inserted very easily and then dropped free. Now, one thing that did happen to us at when we take it to the range is that I put the magazine in, chambered around, everything worked, lined up to fire, and the magazine dropped. And I think what happened is I hit this with my thumb. You'll see that it's not recessed. It's very easy to operate, but without any kind of guard around it or recess, it may be a little bit easier to operate it when you don't intend to. That only happened once, and I adjusted my grip to keep my thumb away from it, to keep my thumb up a little bit, and I didn't have any problems with it since then. From a function perspective, the gun did function flawlessly other than that, and I really think that was me. It worked perfectly, it fed various ammos that we went through it, and he's had no trouble since the time he had it. It's got a lot of features on it that make it ergonomic and comfortable to hold. And this is, of course, the civilian version of Beretta's MHS trial submission, competing with the Glock, the 509, and a few other guns. It's got kind of a sandpapery texture. It's a real mild sandpapery texture on the sides. It's got a much more aggressive texturing at the back, and you see it kind of's got a bit of a swell to it. It's kind of fat in the middle. It swells up a little bit. And then on the front, it's got the faintest of finger grooves, with a little bit of texturing actually in the grooves. If I turn it a little bit, you can see the texturing in the grooves. It fits comfortably in the hand. Found it real easy to grip, real easy to hold on to. It's got a really large trigger guard, so if you're wearing gloves, you're going to have a very easy time getting into the trigger guard. And it does have a 3-slot Picatinny rail for mounting accessories. The sights on this turned out to be quite nice. They're a bright 3-dot sight with a really large front dot. Found them real easy to pick up on the range, real easy to see, and the sights were quite easy to work with. The slide serrations are a little bit polarizing. Some people really like them, some people really don't like them. But one thing I can say for sure, there's no shortage of places to grab a hold of this thing. Whether it's to do a press check, whether you're cycling it, there's lots of places to get a hold of it. You might want to be a little bit careful with the ones right here that kind of encourage you to grab it in this area. It's likely to bite if you get your finger in there. So even though there's serrations all down the length of it, be a little careful grabbing it in the middle. But nowhere else, I mean, you want to grab it at the front, you want to grab it at the back, it's really easy to get a hold of. It does just kind of give it a little bit unusual look. So it all depends on what you like and don't like. The trigger on this is fairly nice. It's got almost no take-up, and then a super short break. But there is a little bit of creep in there, and you don't necessarily feel it when you're dry firing it, but I kind of noticed it at the range. And then the reset is actually quite short, and then still a little bit of creep there, and then the break. And one thing I found with this is it was a little harder to get consistent groups with this, because the trigger, it felt like it was right where it was going to break, but then it would creep and then break. Sometimes it'd creep a little bit more than others, so it took a little practice to get good groups with this. You know, I'd pull a nice tight group and then one would go over there. And what I did is I found that I was starting to have a tendency to want to kind of slap this trigger. And that is not something, of course, that's going to get you good grouping. So you would want to spend a little time practicing with the trigger and get good with it. And of course, by slap the trigger, you start to get into a tendency, instead of a nice smooth trigger pull like this, you would start to kind of just hit the trigger. And of course, when you saw when I did that, the gun moved a little bit. That's a training issue. You could train through that, but it is something that I found I was more inclined to do this with some other guns because the trigger had that little bit of inconsistent creep. Not a bad trigger by any stretch of the imagination. Short and really nice, kind of a light trigger, but just a little bit different. The one area where this gun really kind of falls short is takedown, and that procedure, number one, the manual is actually not that good. You get this big thick manual and you think, oh great, I'm going to get a nice detailed manual. Well, it looks like it's got half a dozen languages, I think probably even including Klingon, so the actual English part of it's fairly small. And they left a few things in the process kind of undocumented. So let me show you how to take this down, and I'll show you a couple different ways to do it. To follow the documented procedure, You would cycle it to make sure it's unloaded, and then there's a button here that you have to push to disengage the sear. And what it tells you in the manual is to pull the slide back and push the button until you hear a click. What they don't tell you is you have to have the slide at just the right spot. So if you just pull it back some random amount and then push the button, you may or may not get the click. I'm pushing it and nothing's happening. So what I found to do, and it's going to be kind of hard to show you on camera, is I would pull it back till it's right about here, till this line was almost there. And then I would push on the button and then pull the slide back a little bit till it clicks. And that spot seems to vary a little bit. At that point, the sear is now disengaged. That was the easy part. The more difficult part is you have to push this in and flip this lever down at the same time. And I'm really convinced that the engineer that built this has 3 arms, 3 hands. Because to do it the way they picture it in the manual, you're kind of pushing down on this and reaching over and flipping the lever. Now what I found, there's 2 different ways to do this. One, if you've got strong hands, you can just bring your hand over the top of the slide, put the ball of your thumb on the lever and push it, and then flip the lever down with your finger. And then it'll of course come apart. But that actually does require a decent amount of strength in your hands. You can try pushing on this with a punch or like the edge of a Glock tool, but it's got a little bit of a bevel to it, so it's a bit slippery. So what you're going to find yourself doing if you use a punch is scratching it up. And if you use something like this, it's going to be constantly slipping off. So the hand over with the thumb is one way to do it. Another way to do it is to take something like this armorer's block or a piece of wood or something like that. Oh, I do need to re-disengage the sear because I cycled it a little bit, the sear will have re-engaged. So now the sear is disengaged. Set it on something like an armorer's block this way with that button on the armorer's block. Push down on it with one hand and then you can flip the lever with the other hand. Overall, not a very well designed takedown procedure. Too many little weird steps and too many areas where it does require some amount of strength that not everybody that has this gun in their possession is necessarily going to have. Now again, I did mention you could get past that sear disconnect by pulling the trigger, but the documented procedure involves using that. Once you have it apart, you start looking at the internals of the gun, it's a pretty well designed gun. Now this is a chassis style gun similar to the P320, and it has nice long rails. It's on both sides. This one of course has a split on it for the slide stop, slide release, but it's got nice almost full length rails. So your guide rails are really robust. The internals of it are relatively simple and straightforward, but one of the things I mentioned early in the video is being able to change the back straps, and you can do that. However, if I get some light in here, there's a thing right here. Now let's see if I can get some light on it. See it right there? That little pointy section right here. In order to change the back strap, you have to grab this with a punch or something like that, push it to the side and down at the same time. And that'll there's a long metal bar through here, and that'll push that metal bar down a little bit, and then you can grab it from underneath and pull it out, put the new back strap on and slide it back in. I played with that just briefly, pushed on it a little bit, and I can see where it's actually going to be quite difficult to do it reliably because you're pushing to the side and pushing down at the same time and needing to get a hold of something that's right here. You can see that metal piece. This is going to protrude. Now theoretically you could pull on this at the same time you're pushing on that, but now we're back to 3 hands. So unlike all of the other guns that have replaceable back straps where they can be done one-handed, the Glock, there's a little pin you push out here. Some of them actually just have a little, you just squeeze them and there's a little release that releases and they pop off. This one is probably the most convoluted backstrap change process that I've seen, and it's actually not all that easily done. But once you get the backstrap on it that you like, that fits your hand, it's kind of a short-term problem. You'll get it configured the way you want it. But in the case of this gun, I borrowed it, so I really wasn't wanting to do what it would take to take that apart, risk damaging or bending anything on a gun that I don't own, so I left it as it is. If this had been one of the other guns with a much simpler process, I might have put a backstrap on it to fit my hands, done what I was going to do, and then given it back to the owner in the original condition that it was in. And I did mention the chassis on this. This chassis is removable, and you could put it into other grip frames. I haven't seen any other grip frames available yet, but unlike its major competitor in that territory, the SIG, on the SIG you just kind of pull this, you turn this a little bit and pull this out and grab the front chassis and it comes right out. This one here, you have to disconnect springs at the back, and if you have a manual safety, you have to actually remove the manual safety. And then there's other things you have to take apart and springs you have to remove to actually free this chassis up to get it out of there. So it's actually not all that easy to do, and there's a lot of things that require tools such as a pick, screwdriver, or other armorer's tools, versus like the SIG where you just pull this thing out. You don't need any other tools other than your hands, and you only need the normal two that a human typically comes with. So I think that they took a concept that's good, but the implementation of that particular feature wasn't as good as some of the others that it competes with. So let's go ahead and move on to the slide. Okay, well, we'll start removing this hot mess from it. This is the dual spring guide rod. It's captive. Now, it kind of looks like a rat's nest. I will say it worked reliably. We had no problems with it. It didn't jam, bind, or anything else. But it's kind of the weirdest looking recoil spring assembly that I've ever seen. But it does work. Pull out the barrel. The barrel's nicely done, very nicely machined. Nice wide flared feed ramp. We really didn't have any ammo sensitivity issues with this, and this appears to be quite well done. We've got standard rifling. Get it where you can see it there. Nice and smooth, everything in there is well smooth and well machined. And one thing I will say, this gun has a few quirks to it, but the manufacturing quality on it seems to be high. Everything that looks like it was well done, well machined. I don't know about this maybe, but it does appear to be a good high quality gun and should provide good reliable service. And once you get used to its few quirks, you'll move on with that and you'll be good. Looking at the slide, it continues the concept of being well machined and high quality. Few quirks in here. One thing is there's the drop safety, and I'm not sure why Beretta has a tendency to want to do this on their guns, but when you push on the drop safety, you have a piston that protrudes from the top. Now, one concept could be that if you're holstering it, you can put a thumb there, and if it's starting to pull the trigger, then you'd feel it. But one thing I found is it didn't protrude very far before the trigger pulled. It's got such a short trigger and a short break that as a safety feature, it would probably punch into your finger and you detect it right about the time that it shot you in the leg. So I don't think that that's really necessarily a valid safety concept. It's a wide oblong piston which would easily self-center itself and self-support itself. So it's really not necessary for centering or support of the piston. So I'm not really sure why they carry that forward. This is the Beretta 92, 96 series have this, and a few of the PX series had it. Most other guns that have a drop safety piston, dispense with anything sticking out of the top. Didn't have any problems with it, didn't have it hang up on anything. It did work perfectly, and this is a drop safe weapon. That's just another one of its kind of little bit unique quirks. Reassembly on this is far easier than disassembly. You drop the barrel back in. This recoil spring goes in one way, and if you try to put it in the wrong way, it just won't go, so it's easy, but the smaller end goes up to the front. And then drop it in place and center it. It does have a tendency to kind of center well, so it's fairly easy to center it. Take your frame, line it up, slide it back, and most of the time when you slap it back, and you lock it back, this will reset itself. If for some reason it doesn't, then flip this back up, and you're back in operating mode. So getting it back together after you've disassembled it is very easy and very straightforward. It's just they could have probably done a little bit better job with the disassembly procedure. The last thing I'll talk about is the dimensions and give it a size comparison. It's 7.55 inches long front to back. It's 5.6 inches tall, and it's 1.3 inches thick. So it's in the compact territory. And from a size perspective, I'll go ahead and put one of the flush mount magazines back in it. Here's an FN 509, which is another one of the military trial contenders. This one's an FN. And you'll see that they're roughly the same size. Now if I go beaver tail to beaver tail, the FN's much shorter. If I line up with the grips, they're about the same. And one thing that I notice is that there's kind of a long overhang at the back, you know, a significant kind of a beaver tail overhang that actually comes well back behind your hand. So it's kind of a different centering on the gun, but I don't think that affects the ability to use it or comfortably shoot it. But what it does do is you'll have a little more gun sticking up at the back. You can see it there. When you've got it in a holster and the grip is in position, you're going to have a little more gun sticking up at the back. From a height perspective, they're almost identical. The FN 509 has one more slot on the Picatinny rail, but that's kind of a minor thing. Most of the accessories on the market today have kind of adapted to Glock with one slot, and usually have some mechanism for moving them forward and backward on the rail. So the 3 rails on the APX are going to be more than enough to get the job done. And this is pretty much, it's consistent with all the other, you know, compact pistols, Glock 19, P320, FN 509, with, you know, a few minor differences, but it fits right in with all the others in the crowd. So overall, the gun was reliable. To me, the takedown procedure and a couple of its ergonomic quirks might be a showstopper, might lean me to look in another direction like the 509, the 320, or the Glock. But it was a reliable gun. It does appear to be a very good quality gun. Everything's manufactured well. And if you can work your way through living with a couple of those quirks, I think it'll serve you quite well. Beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe. Of course, check us out on Facebook, and have a great day. Thank you.